In a world filled with liars, manipulators, and silent betrayers, we are told to forgive, to let things go in the name of peace. But Niccolò Machiavelli would tell you something very different. Forgiveness, when given to the wrong people, is nothing more than a weapon against yourself. Today, we're diving deep into the 40 brutal truths Machiavelli would use to expose modern betrayal, in families, schools, workplaces, and even business. Each lesson is a ruthless reminder that not everyone deserves a second chance. And those who betray you once will almost always betray you again, so if you're tired of being deceived, manipulated, or used, stay with me until the end. These are lessons that will change the way you see loyalty forever. A teenager in your house repeatedly lies about where they were, who they were with, and why homework is missing. Every time you catch them you say, "Okay, we'll talk about it later," then sink back into the same cycle. In a modern Machiavellian approach, you stop the cycle immediately. You document dates and times, you create a zero-ambiguity rule, curfew, phone checks, homework deadlines, and you enforce a predictable consequence that removes privileges the moment the lie appears. Machiavelli in 2025 wouldn't preach about feelings. He'd treat the child like a stakeholder whose behavior needs reliable incentives and credible disincentives. He'd make rewards conditional, public within the family, so the child's social capital at home depends on honesty. And he'd quietly enlist allies, another parent, a tutor, or the child's coach, to back the rules so the adolescent learns that deception costs them more than it gains. When a younger sibling weaponizes guilt to get out of chores, "I can't wash dishes, I had a rough day." Repeated until you give in, the Machiavellian fix is structural. You write the expectations down, divide labor visibly on a shared family board, and tie privileges, screen time, friends over, to completion. You don't negotiate feelings every night, you pre-commit. Machiavelli would remove the emotional theater by turning requests into transactions. Show me the completed chore, get the good thing. Over time, the manipulative tactic loses its profit margin because it no longer produces immediate benefits. The parent who lets guilt win trains a career manipulator. The parent who designs a transparent, enforceable system trains reliability. A child who consistently blames teachers or group members when scores slip is a modern problem of externalizing responsibility. The Machiavellian response is to flip the narrative from excuses to measurable improvement plans, a weekly progress log, mandatory tutoring sessions, and small, trackable goals with immediate consequences, no weekend outings until X score achieved. He'd not only set the metric but control the narrative, emails to teachers copied to the child, a calendar visible to the whole household, so the child learns that blame has no currency if the outcome isn't fixed. In Machiavelli's hands, this is not punishment for shame's sake, it's a conversion of vague blame into concrete accountability that gradually rewires the student's habit of dodging responsibility. When a child uses social media to humiliate someone from class, screenshots, viral jokes, group DMs, Machiavellian action is swift containment and corrective optics. First, you remove their access to the platform and require an in-person restitution, private apology, community service, or monitored reconciliation steps. Second, you make the consequences known to relevant adults, school admin, coaches, and insist they be part of the remediation, so the action has institutional weight. Machiavelli would treat the platform as a weapon, disarm it, deprive the child of the weapon's advantages, and then rebuild their social standing through purposeful acts that restore trust rather than sentimental lectures that the child will ignore. In family fights, when a relative publicly spreads private grievances to make a point, modern Machiavelli would refuse the stage. Instead of trading barbs, he would neutralize the weapon by controlling the distribution of information, correct the record calmly in the same channels, present facts in writing, and limit that relative's access to family resources where their influence matters. He would cultivate other family members as witnesses so the manipulator's story loses traction. The tactic is not revenge, it's reputational triage. By treating disclosure as strategic information, Machiavelli would cut the manipulator's leverage and re-establish a norm that private problems stay private unless the violator forces a public consequence. When an aunt or uncle uses emotional blackmail, guilt trips, "after all I did for you," to dodge responsibility or demand favors, the Machiavellian answer is contractual clarity. You set roles and expectations into simple written agreements, timelines for care, contribution amounts, or rotating support duties, and make continued help conditional on compliance. In modern families, paper and clarity strip manipulation of its veil. Once obligations are explicit, guilt becomes harder to weaponize. Machiavelli would say, remove ambiguity, create sanctions, and stop negotiating emotional debt in the moment because emotional pleas succeed when rules are fuzzy. A group project in school where one student freeloads while others carry the grade is a perfect place for Machiavellian design. Make contribution visible and costly to miss. Require logged commits on Google Docs, recorded meeting timestamps, and interim deliverables graded individually. Machiavelli's modern hand would structure the assignment so the free rider cannot skate by. He'd use transparency and micro-deadlines as enforcement tools rather than appeals to character. If someone still tries to parasitize the team, the group escalates to the teacher with documented proof, not to shame, but to enforce fairness and deter future freeloaders. When a teacher or faculty member consistently sidelines a capable child because they don't fit the teacher's sentimental favorites, Machiavelli acts like a political fixer. He builds alternative power. You find other mentors, submit polished work publicly, class presentations copied to email lists, and recruit allies among parents to insist on fair evaluation. You don't plead for favor, you manufacture influence. He would also document patterns and use institutional appeals, student councils, formal complaints, as strategic moves rather than moral crusades, converting perceived injustice into administrative pressure that changes incentives for the teacher. If a child is being undermined by classmates' gossip or petty exclusion, Machiavellian strategy focuses on demonstrating value while cutting the rumor's oxygen. The response is twofold: strengthen the child's visible competence, participate in teams, publish work publicly, attend events, and neutralize gossip by presenting facts calmly and through respected intermediaries, coaches, mentors. Machiavelli would advise refraining from emotional rebuttals and instead using quiet, consistent evidence of character that erodes the rumor's credibility. Over time, competence and alliances eclipse slander because people prefer being associated with winners. When a coworker takes credit for your project in the Zoom stand-up. A modern Machiavelli does not rage privately, he annotates. He sends a concise follow-up email that records who did what, shares the document timeline in the team space, and asks for clarification in the next meeting in a way that forces attribution. I'm glad this shipped. Would you confirm who led the API integration so we can include it in the release notes? Machiavelli's move is to make your contribution unavoidable in the record. If the theft continues, escalate formally with documented proof to your manager and HR, but always maintain composure. Public fury hands your opponent the moral high ground and obscures the facts. If a manager promises promotion and repeatedly delays while piling work on you, Machiavelli's prescription is written expectation and a fallback plan. Convert verbal promises into an email with timelines and measurable deliverables. Request a one-on-one with a clear agenda and walk-away criteria. He would protect his options by quietly exploring the market, not as drama but as leverage, and make the manager choose between honoring the commitment or losing a valuable player. In this scenario, Machiavelli's language is not vengeance but negotiation backed by credible alternatives. The power lies in your ability to credibly leave if the contract is not met, when a colleague is chronically toxic and drags morale down. Machiavelli removes their influence rather than indulging in confrontations. He documents the behavior, aligns with other team members to create a unified front, and presents the case to leadership with clear examples of decreased output and engagement. He uses institutional levers, performance reviews, reassignment requests, to limit the toxic individual's capacity to harm. The goal is not public shaming but neutralization, remove their ability to dictate team tone and protect the collective productivity. If someone in the office uses private messages you sent to embarrass you, the Machiavellian response is immediate procedural containment and reputational repair. Save the messages, inform HR, and produce a brief, factual statement in the appropriate forum that reframes the issue in professional terms. He would avoid an emotional soapbox and instead deploy policy and evidence. Machiavelli would also tighten communication practices going forward, use official channels, avoid informal confessions, so the weapon cannot be reused. In business, if a partner quietly shares your deck with competitors or undercuts pricing behind your back, a modern Machiavelli insists on structural protection before the handshake, NDAs. Staged funding/tranche releases, escrow, and explicit exit clauses. If betrayal occurs, he executes the contractual remedies swiftly, injunctions, escrow holds, or publicizing breach through legal channels if necessary, not for spectacle but to restore deterrence. The lesson: never rely solely on goodwill in a deal, build systems that make betrayal expensive and recovery possible. When a client repeatedly refuses to pay after services are delivered, Machiavelli would have never delivered the final value without staged payments or a retained asset clause. If you're already owed money, he'd use collections, legal demand letters, and reputational pressure, carefully documented reviews and public records, as leverage to compel payment. The modern twist is using platforms, Stripe disputes, LinkedIn callouts framed as factual accountings, to make non-payment more costly than settlement. He prefers preemption, design deals to avoid hanging credit, but when forced, he uses proportional, legal pressure to extract what's due, if a supplier begins delivering substandard components that threaten your product. Machiavelli would immediately restrict purchases, enforce quality holdbacks, and deploy contingency suppliers while invoking contract penalties. He'd also make the failure public within the trade, rumored cautiously, to ensure the supplier suffers business consequences. Again, these are strategic moves built on contracts and commercial leverage, not mere insults. Machiavelli's playbook always converts breach into calculable costs so bad behavior stops because it becomes unprofitable. When friends only appear when you're winning, liking your posts, attending your launch, then ghosting when you're down, Machiavelli would treat social capital like a currency measured by how people behave in loss, not in gain. He would quietly track who shows up in hard seasons, favor those relationships with real responsibility and opportunities, and let the opportunists stay guests at the table but never partners in projects that matter. That way you immunize your ventures from fair-weather players. Loyalty is not sentimental, it's a business metric. If someone constantly borrows money, time, or emotional labor and never reciprocates, Machiavelli converts favors into enforceable agreements. You set repayment dates, formalize expectations in calendar invites or invoices, and follow up automatically. The idea is to remove shame as the medium of enforcement and replace it with contracts and deadlines. He'd teach that kindness without structure invites parasitism, structured generosity yields loyalty and predictable returns. When a partner, parent, or coworker attempts to gaslight you, deny what happened, rewrite the story, Machiavelli's response is meticulous record-keeping and neutral witnesses. Save messages, keep meeting notes, and cultivate a circle of fact-bearing allies. Instead of trying to convince the gaslighter, he would undermine their power by making the facts visible and verifiable to third parties whose impartiality matters. Gaslighting relies on isolating your narrative. Machiavelli weaponizes documentation and witnesses to prevent isolation. There are scenarios where measured forgiveness is a tool. A junior who made a one-time dishonest choice but immediately accepts consequences and commits documented restitution can be retained and reshaped because the cost of losing a talented person is higher than disciplining them. Machiavelli's calculus is coldly pragmatic. Forgiveness is not moral mercy, it's a transaction to buy future utility. If the person's recidivism risk is low and their skills are valuable, he'd set strict probationary terms and monitor closely. If the person holds leverage you can't neutralize, forgiveness becomes a strategic purchase with tight conditions. Finally, Machiavelli in modern life would focus less on personal drama and more on systems. Build contracts, transparent processes, visible metrics, and institutional allies so single bad actors cannot derail you. He'd reward loyalty publicly and punish betrayal in ways that restore the balance of incentives, removing privileges, activating legal remedies, or withdrawing business ties, always in proportion and always with the aim of stabilizing the environment. Brutal honesty in his playbook means recognizing that forgiveness without structure is indulgence. The modern remedy is ruthless about one thing only: making every social interaction predictable and consequential so that harmful behavior stops being profitable. A teenager in your house repeatedly lies about where they were, who they were with, and why homework is missing. You catch them every time, but the cycle repeats because your response is weak. You scold them, maybe ground them for a day, then fall back into forgiving them because you hope they'll learn eventually. The reality? They don't. They adapt, sharpen their lies, and test boundaries until lying becomes their default survival tactic. Machiavelli, if he lived today, would dismantle this cycle with precision. He would not frame honesty as a moral choice but as an enforced rule of the household economy. He'd create systems, clear curfews logged into apps, mandatory photo or location sharing, documented homework checks. Then he'd enforce consequences without delay: lost privileges, cut internet, or restricted outings. Forgiveness would not come until compliance was proven. He'd also secure allies, perhaps another parent, a tutor, or even a coach at school, turning honesty into a currency the child must spend to function in daily life. This isn't about being cruel, it's about being effective. Endless forgiveness here only raises a manipulator. Consistent consequence raises an adult who knows honesty pays better than deceit. When a younger sibling weaponizes guilt to escape responsibility, "I had such a rough day, so I can't wash the dishes," parents often give in, hoping to keep peace in the house. Over time, that sibling learns that whining and guilt-tripping are stronger tools than discipline or contribution. This is how you create adults who cut corners, cry victim, and expect others to clean up their mess. A Machiavellian approach strips the manipulation of its power by pre-committing structure. Chores become a posted schedule in plain sight of the entire family, and privileges, like Wi-Fi, gaming, or time with friends, are tied directly to completion. No chore, no privilege. Emotional appeals don't sway the system. Because the rules are now transactional and transparent. Machiavelli in this case isn't just punishing laziness, he's rewriting the home economy so manipulation has zero profit margin. Over time, the guilt tactic becomes useless because the child knows no amount of whining changes the ledger. Instead of a manipulator, you raise someone who understands responsibility is non-negotiable, and the household runs on predictable rules, not emotional drama. Children who constantly externalize blame, always pointing to the teacher, the classmate, or the system whenever they fail, are not just avoiding accountability, they're learning how to manipulate sympathy. In modern classrooms, this turns into endless excuses: the teacher hates me, our group made me look bad, the test was unfair. Left unchecked, this child becomes an adult who dodges accountability in the workplace, blaming managers, deadlines, or the company every time performance slips. Machiavelli would cut this cycle by forcing external excuses into measurable outcomes. He would not waste time debating blame, he'd design a clear progress system, tutoring sessions logged weekly, improvement goals posted on the fridge, and consequences directly tied to results. He'd involve the teacher, making reports public, so there's no room to hide. By stripping away excuses and demanding trackable progress, Machiavelli reframes blame into accountability. The lesson? The world doesn't care about your excuses, only your results. Forgiving this pattern endlessly raises an adult who manipulates their way out of work. Enforcing structure builds someone who knows that only measurable performance earns rewards. Social media bullying is a new battlefield Machiavelli would dominate. Imagine a teenager using TikTok or Instagram to mock a classmate, post screenshots, or turn private messages into memes. Parents today often forgive too quickly, hoping the behavior will fade or be a phase. But online humiliation spreads like wildfire, and forgiveness without consequence makes the abuser bolder. Machiavelli would approach it as warfare in the digital age. First, strip the bully of their weapon by removing their access to accounts and monitoring usage. Second, impose restitution, not just apology, direct confrontation, mandated apologies in front of peers or teachers, even enforced participation in acts that build empathy, volunteering, tutoring, or restorative practices. And third, make allies of institutions, inform teachers, coaches, and administrators so the social weight of authority presses down. Machiavelli wouldn't rely on the bully's conscience, he'd create a reality where cruelty destroys social standing. In his modern view, forgiveness without punishment fuels repeat offenders. He'd say you don't cure cruelty with sympathy, you cure it by making cruelty costly. Family conflicts are fertile ground for manipulation. A relative who vents every grievance on group chats, exposes private arguments during reunions, or twists half-truths for attention creates chaos that weak parents or siblings tolerate to keep the peace. Forgiveness here is poison, because the manipulator thrives on lack of resistance. Machiavelli would see the situation as an information war. The only way to survive is to control the flow of information and reframe the narrative. Instead of shouting matches, he'd respond with calm, documented facts, sent privately to the right people. He'd limit that relatives' access to sensitive information so there's nothing left to weaponize. He'd also build alliances among family members, making sure siblings, parents, or cousins know the truth, so the manipulator loses credibility. In this framework, forgiveness is useless unless combined with action. Machiavelli would say, you don't silence a family agitator with mercy, you silence them by stripping them of ammunition and building your own network of loyalty. Peace doesn't come from forgiving chaos, peace comes from controlling it. Emotional blackmail inside families is a classic modern trap. An aunt who says, after everything I did for you, you owe me this, or a sibling who guilts you into paying their bills, thrives because forgiveness turns debt into endless slavery. Machiavelli wouldn't tolerate this cycle. He'd convert emotion into contract. Family responsibilities, financial help, or caregiving duties would be laid out in writing, agreed upon, and tracked. He'd say, when expectations are formalized, guilt loses its fangs. A sibling demanding money now has a written record showing they already owe. An aunt demanding favors faces a schedule where duties are clearly rotated. Forgiveness is no longer an exploitable currency. Because the entire family economy is transactional and transparent. Machiavelli would never just forgive repeated emotional blackmail. He'd restructure the system so manipulation dies in the face of clarity, and only fairness remains enforceable. In schools, group projects reveal who's responsible and who's a parasite. Every student knows the scenario: one or two carry the workload while the slacker coasts, then shares the grade. Teachers often encourage forgiveness. It's about teamwork, not grades. But Machiavelli would treat it as training ground for adult exploitation. He'd insist on structures that make freeloading impossible: shared documents with tracked edits, mandatory task logs, and deadlines where contributions are visible to the group and the teacher. If the slacker still refuses, Machiavelli would escalate with evidence to the teacher, removing the parasite's ability to skate by. He wouldn't waste breath on appeals to fairness or kindness, because he knows people exploit any system without enforcement. Forgiveness here simply trains future coworkers who take credit without working. Machiavelli's method: make sure no one can cheat without consequence, and teach children early that responsibility is not optional, it's survival. Sometimes the bias isn't among peers but authority figures. A teacher ignores your child's work, promotes favorites, or actively undermines them. Parents often say, "Just forgive, the world isn't fair." But Machiavelli would never accept unfair disadvantage without a counter-strategy. He'd build power. That means engaging other teachers, mentors, or administrators to make the bias visible. It means pushing your child to publish their work in spaces the teacher can't ignore: competitions, online platforms, or presentations, making excellence undeniable. He'd also document patterns of unfair grading and pressure the system through official complaints if needed. Forgiveness of systemic bias teaches your child to accept being stepped on. Machiavelli would teach them to maneuver, build influence, and force fairness where none exists. Workplaces are modern courts full of betrayal. A colleague who steals credit for your work isn't just annoying, they're practicing professional theft. Too often, people forgive in silence, hoping karma balances the scales. But Machiavelli would see silence as surrender. He'd immediately control the narrative with documentation: emails summarizing contributions, timestamps of edits, or meeting follow-ups that clarify who did what. He'd expose theft politely but publicly, forcing the truth into the open record. Forgiveness, in this case, is complicity. Machiavelli's approach doesn't rage or beg. It simply makes theft impossible by weaponizing transparency. That way, the thief gains nothing, and everyone learns your contributions cannot be erased. A manager who promises promotions, piles on extra work, and then delays endlessly is another modern manipulator. Employees forgive these cycles because they fear rocking the boat. But Machiavelli would never gamble his future on empty promises. He'd demand written expectations, clear timelines, measurable goals, and back them up with alternatives: networking, job searches, or side projects. Forgiveness in this setting means you remain chained to broken promises. Machiavelli would treat your labor as a commodity with value. If the promise is not honored, he would walk away, not bitterly, but strategically, using the leverage of his value to secure something better elsewhere. Forgiveness is weakness when it allows exploitation to continue. Strategic demand backed by credible exit is power. In the office, some coworkers poison the atmosphere with constant negativity. They drag others into gossip, sabotage morale, and yet are forgiven because that's just how they are. Machiavelli would see such people as termites in the structure of productivity. His solution would be systematic: document their behavior, build alliances with teammates who share the frustration, and bring the evidence to leadership as a collective voice. By doing so, he wouldn't just expose the toxicity but remove its cover of isolation. Forgiveness here only empowers the toxic worker to keep undermining others. Machiavelli's brutal logic says, neutralize them. strip their influence, and rebuild the environment without their poison. A coworker who secretly leaks your private messages to embarrass you is a modern version of betrayal. Many employees react with anger, begging for forgiveness, or hoping the incident dies down. But forgiveness here is dangerous. Once someone uses your private words as ammunition, they will do it again, because they know you're too passive to stop them. Machiavelli would treat this as both a reputational crisis and a security breach. He'd save the evidence, immediately involve HR or higher management, and calmly expose the behavior as a violation of trust and policy. Then he'd adapt. No more personal confessions in informal chats, no sensitive comments left unprotected, and always maintain communication through official channels. In Machiavelli's modern world, the lesson is clear: forgiveness allows blackmail to breed. Containment, exposure, and adaptation destroy the weapon and remind others you're not easy prey. Business partnerships often look like friendships until money appears. Imagine a partner who secretly shares your business deck with competitors or undercuts your prices while smiling in meetings. Many entrepreneurs forgive, thinking loyalty will return, but Machiavelli would scoff at such naivety. He would say betrayal in business is not an accident, it is a declaration of war. The modern solution is layered contracts, NDAs, staged payments, legal remedies. If betrayal still occurs, he would act decisively, trigger the clauses. Freeze assets, file injunctions. Not out of emotion, but to set an example, betrayal has a measurable cost. In modern markets, forgiveness invites repeat attacks, while calculated retaliation creates deterrence. Machiavelli's world isn't about emotional repair, it's about making sure betrayal becomes unprofitable. Clients who repeatedly forget to pay after services are delivered are another type who should never be forgiven. Too many businesses let these clients slide, hoping to preserve the relationship. But Machiavelli would see that as a fool's trade, letting your survival depend on someone who already proved they don't respect you. He would demand staged payments up front, use escrow or contracts that release funds automatically, and if the debt still isn't paid, he'd weaponize pressure, collections, legal threats, or public reviews. Not out of spite, but to make non-payment more costly than compliance. Forgiving chronic non-payers builds a reputation that you can be exploited. Enforcing consequences builds respect and forces others to think twice before trying the same. Suppliers who quietly downgrade quality, cutting corners to increase their profit, expect forgiveness because everyone does it. Businesses often look the other way, thinking confrontation risks the relationship. Machiavelli would never tolerate such weakness. He'd immediately test and verify supplies, document failures, and demand penalties or price reductions. He'd line up backup suppliers before confrontation, ensuring leverage. If the deception continued, he'd spread word discreetly in the industry, crippling the offender's reputation. Forgiveness in this case rewards mediocrity and invites disaster for your product. Machiavelli would ensure betrayal has a ripple effect that discourages others from even thinking of cheating you. Fake friends are everywhere today, especially in the digital age. They appear when you succeed, liking your posts, showing up at celebrations, then vanish the moment you fall. Too many forgive them when they reappear later, pretending nothing happened. Machiavelli would treat them as parasites who only attach when the host is healthy. He'd never place them in positions of trust, never include them in ventures, and never count on them in crisis. Instead, he'd cultivate relationships with those who stood beside him during struggle, rewarding loyalty with opportunity. Forgiveness for fake friends means you let them back into your circle to drain you again. Machiavelli's brutal truth is simple: judge people not by how they celebrate with you but by how they endure with you. And never forgive those who only arrive when it benefits them. financial leeches inside families are another type you cannot forgive endlessly. The cousin who constantly borrows money and never pays it back, the sibling who drains your savings with promises they'll pay next week, these are modern predators. Families often forgive because blood is thicker than water. But Machiavelli would laugh at that sentiment. He'd treat money as a contract, even in family. Loans would have dates, repayment schedules, and written acknowledgement. If repayment failed, he would cut off further aid and make the consequences public within the family, so the manipulator loses their mask of victimhood. Forgiveness here only breeds entitlement. Structure teaches responsibility. Machiavelli's method shows that blood ties don't excuse exploitation. Gaslighting is another modern weapon. The partner, parent, or boss who twists reality, denies what happened, and makes you question your memory. Forgiveness here is deadly because it trains you to accept someone else's control over your mind. Machiavelli would never forgive repeated gaslighting. He would document every exchange, keep receipts, record times and places, and quietly gather witnesses. When confronted, the gaslighter's lies collapse under the weight of evidence. Machiavelli's focus would not be on convincing the liar to change, they won't, but on ensuring they can never control the narrative again. Forgiveness in gaslighting is submission. Ruthless record-keeping is survival. Children, too, gaslight parents today. They deny doing chores, insist they studied when they didn't, or twist arguments until the parent doubts their own memory. Parents who forgive too easily raise adults who manipulate relationships and workplaces. Machiavelli would respond by eliminating ambiguity, cameras in the house for chores, grade tracking online, and rules written down so the child cannot twist them. His principle is clear: never leave reality open to interpretation when dealing with manipulators. Forgiveness here is not love, it's an invitation for your child to master deceit. In the workplace, gaslighting shows up when bosses shift blame onto employees, rewriting history to cover their mistakes. Forgiveness makes you a scapegoat forever. Machiavelli would not forgive, he'd document every meeting, forward notes to the team, and ensure timelines were visible. He'd use allies, colleagues who saw the truth, and bring receipts when accused. By exposing reality, he'd protect his credibility. Forgiveness here leaves your career vulnerable. Cold evidence destroys manipulation. Business deals also breed gaslighting. A client denies a feature was promised even though emails prove otherwise, or a partner claims you miscommunicated when they're the one at fault. Forgiving such manipulation ruins your leverage. Machiavelli would respond with contracts, signed agreements, and written timelines. If disputes arose, he'd drag the evidence into the light. He wouldn't argue feelings, he'd argue facts. Forgiveness here means profit stolen. Documentation means survival. Toxic coworkers who gossip and poison morale thrive on forgiveness. Teams let them vent, laugh along, and then act surprised when the poison spreads. Machiavelli would never forgive the gossip machine. He'd collect proof of slander, gather the silent majority who are tired of the behavior, and strike strategically. By exposing gossip to leadership as a documented performance issue, he would neutralize the influence and reframe the gossiper as a liability. Forgiveness only emboldens gossip. Machiavelli's approach makes it a career risk. Sometimes, toxicity comes from above. A boss who plays favorites, undermines workers, or humiliates staff in meetings often expects forgiveness because that's just leadership. Machiavelli would say no. He'd align with peers, build alliances across departments, and quietly network outside the company to maintain options. He would not confront emotionally but strategically. If the toxicity continued, he would leave with leverage, ensuring he landed somewhere stronger. Forgiveness here chains you to abuse. Strategic planning frees you. In parenting, the child who humiliates siblings for laughs, mocking their weight, grades, or failures, often gets forgiven as kids being kids. But Machiavelli would treat it as early tyranny. He'd stop it immediately by stripping privileges, enforcing apologies, and monitoring interactions until respect was restored. He'd make the family system reward kindness and punish cruelty. Forgiveness here raises bullies. Structure raises adults who know cruelty has a cost. Family gatherings often expose financial opportunists, the uncle who demands loans, the cousin who expects gifts but never contributes. Parents forgive to keep harmony, but this only breeds entitlement. Machiavelli would treat every financial exchange as a transaction, not charity. He'd formalize who pays what at gatherings, who contributes to family funds, and expose freeloaders when they fail to meet obligations. Forgiveness only hides imbalance. Transparency reveals it and forces fairness. At school, when students cheat off others and still expect forgiveness, Machiavelli would reject it. He'd structure classrooms where cheaters are caught by surveillance, assignments are randomized, and grades depend on unique contributions. If caught, cheaters would be punished immediately and visibly. Forgiveness creates repeat offenders. Swift consequence creates deterrence. Machiavelli would not call this cruelty but justice. At work, employees who constantly underperform but charm their way into forgiveness are deadly to productivity. Machiavelli would not tolerate them. He'd document their failures, make performance reviews factual and harsh, and recommend reassignment or removal. Forgiveness for incompetence isn't kindness, it's sabotage to everyone else. Machiavelli would protect the system over the individual. In business, investors who manipulate timelines and promise funds but never deliver expect endless forgiveness. Machiavelli would treat such investors as dead weight. He'd cut ties, expose them to the market, and secure backing from reliable sources. Forgiveness here keeps your company dependent on false promises. Brutal clarity ensures survival. Even in friendships, the person who constantly drags you into their drama, calling at 2 a.m. for emotional support but vanishing when you need help, thrives on forgiveness. Machiavelli would cut them off. He'd say relationships must provide value to both sides. Forgiveness here just drains you dry. True loyalty is reciprocal, not one-sided. In parenting, when children lash out violently and parents endlessly forgive, hoping it's just a phase, Machiavelli would enforce discipline immediately. He'd make aggression carry weighty consequences, restrictions, counseling, even public accountability. Forgiveness alone raises violent adults. Discipline redirects behavior. Workplace favoritism is no different. Employees forgive unfair promotions, thinking hard work alone will someday be rewarded. Machiavelli would laugh. He'd network, position himself visibly, and use leverage to bypass favoritism. Forgiveness here means obscurity. Strategy means survival. In business deals, forgiving delays, missed deadlines, and dishonesty quickly ruins you. Machiavelli would enforce penalties immediately. Contracts would include consequences, and partners would learn reliability isn't optional. Forgiveness trains people to take advantage. Enforcement trains them to respect you. Parents forgiving repeated disrespect from teenagers, slammed doors, shouted insults, raise adults who disrespect authority everywhere. Machiavelli would demand correction, privileges stripped, apologies enforced, consequences repeated. Forgiveness alone teaches contempt. Discipline breeds respect. Family betrayal, such as a sibling spreading lies for inheritance, is often forgiven because family is family. Machiavelli would strike back with lawyers, documentation, and public exposure. Forgiveness in financial betrayal loses you both money and dignity. Structure saves both. At school, bullies forgiven repeatedly grow crueler. Machiavelli would punish swiftly, not with lectures but with real consequences: suspension, accountability, forced restitution. Forgiveness fuels bullying. Consequence ends it. At work, bosses who guilt employees into unpaid overtime and workers who forgive it create toxic norms. Machiavelli would never forgive. He'd set boundaries, log hours, and refuse exploitation. Forgiveness creates burnout. Boundaries create respect. In business, partners who break confidentiality are unforgivable. Machiavelli would immediately enforce legal consequences, cut ties, and warn others. Forgiveness means your ideas keep leaking. Retaliation restores security. Even in love, repeated infidelity is often forgiven. Machiavelli would not. He'd see it as structural betrayal. Forgiveness here only guarantees repetition. Walking away immediately protects dignity and future. Finally, Machiavelli would say forgiveness has its place only when it strengthens your power. Forgiveness as blind mercy is weakness. Forgiveness as strategy, when it secures loyalty, future leverage, or public image, is power. But for habitual liars, betrayers, manipulators, and abusers of trust, forgiveness is poison. In today's world, his advice is brutally clear: design consequences, enforce systems, and stop confusing forgiveness with wisdom. Machiavelli never believed in forgiveness for the untrustworthy. And in our modern world, his lessons are clearer than ever. Betrayal doesn't deserve a free pass, it deserves strategy, discipline, and decisive action. Whether it's at home, in school, at work, or in business, the moment you stop forgiving those who abuse your trust is the moment you start reclaiming your power. If this video gave you clarity, strength, or even a wake-up call, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this video with someone who needs to hear the truth. The more people learn to stop rewarding betrayal with forgiveness, the stronger we all become. Until next time, remember, forgiveness is mercy, but Machiavelli knew, mercy without wisdom is weakness.